Good.
All right, we are good. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Deb Neuman, President of the Bangor Region Chamber of Commerce, with Shelley Sund, our Director of Marketing and Events. I'm in a room in my house that we're turning into another office, so it might be a little echoey, and we do have more stuff than what you see on the shelf right now. It looks really boring. My husband is upstairs right now in my office, supposedly, so for those of you who work from home with your spouse on occasion, I'm sure you can relate. It's all good. And Anne-Marie is here from Rudman Winchell. Anne-Marie Storey, how are you this afternoon? How are things at Rudman?
Awesome. We might have a surprise visitor in a little while. I can't say for sure, but she might be here.
We can all use her today. So every 2 weeks, we're very fortunate to have Anne-Marie Storey join us with employment updates and take your questions that you might have about anything related to your employees, to your workplace, to back to school. We're going to cover some of that this afternoon. We're here for an hour. We are recording this, so if you missed it or you missed part of it, you can check it out on our Facebook page, Bangor Region Chamber of Commerce. Most importantly, this is your opportunity to ask questions. So use the Q&A feature on Zoom, or if you're joining us on Facebook, you can post a question in the comment section or just message Shelley and she will feed those questions to me and we'll go from there. And again, we're grateful to Anne-Marie for doing this with us every 2 weeks. Keep us updated, keep us informed. I was just on a call. It's interesting. I was on a call with some of my chamber counterparts and some state government people and businesses, and I think everybody's feeling a little COVID weary right now. You just feel it. We're all kind of tired. Yeah. And trying to stay motivated, trying to keep morale up, trying to push through this and keep going. But boy, it does hit you. I think it's hit us all that this isn't going to be over soon. And now you have the added stress of people returning to school, kids returning to school. A lot of us are thinking about what will the winter months bring, especially businesses that will have to move indoors, restaurants and such, and just that, all of that uncertainty right now. So if you're feeling it, you're not alone. We're right there with you. So, but we'll try to keep going. We will keep going and provide you with as much support and resources that we can muster up during this time. So Anne-Marie, before we got on the call, we were talking a little bit about school, and you had some thoughts about that and some guidance for us. But I'll just toss the ball to you right now and fill us in on anything that's new, anything that you want to share.
All right. So, I mean, I do have COVID related stuff, of course, because what would life be without that? But I do have some other things that we could talk about. Just some updates I want to make sure everybody knows about. We've done some blasts on some of these, but number one is the minimum wage increase as of January 1, 2021. Now, the reason for this increase, everybody probably remembers that when the law was changed several years ago, it was a graduated increase. Oh my God. You have to see this. She is filthy. Oh my God. Can you see her face? Hello, honey. Don't come near me.
Oh my gosh.
Apparently they played in the mud today.
They did.
So please introduce us for anybody who's watching who has not met your new family member.
This is our St. Bernard puppy, Josie, who's not going to fall off the table, who was at daycare today and apparently had a little muddy time. Can you see that face? She is the sweetest thing ever. She's 10. Hello, are you asleep? I think she's asleep. She is literally asleep. She's 10 weeks old and she is a sweetheart, and she is actually asleep. But that's okay.
That's awesome.
So if you need a little light in your day, here it is.
Thank you. Thank you, Josie. Take a nap. It's nap time.
So I'll take her. So that's when I leave here, I am taking the dog home to give her a bath. Bye, sweetie. And now she's gonna go mess up John's office. Oh, there you go.
Oh, we needed that. We needed that on this.
All right. So there, now I am also filthy. And there's your comic relief. So thank you, John.
You're welcome.
Bye, Joes. So from that, we're going to go back to increase in minimum wage. So as I was saying, a couple of years ago, the law was amended to do a gradual increase in the minimum wage until it hit a certain cap, and that cap was $12 an hour. So that was last January 1. And after that, it depends on the cost of living index. So conceivably, it could go up or down, and it's going to change, it's going to be different every year, and you're not going to know what the change is going to be until the DOL tells us. So now they have told us it's going up from $12 to $12.15 an hour as of January 1, 2021. And so that same indexing formula will now be applied ongoing each year. That's how it will be determined. That means that the main minimum salary threshold in order to remain exempt. So for those of you who have exempt people, if they're right on the cusp of what the salary basis is, it's going to go up to $797 per week, $700.97 per week, which is equates to $36,450 per year. So make sure you're still meeting that salary basis test, because Maine is different than federal. Also, that means that the service employee minimum wage, so for those of you who have tipped employees, the minimum as of January 1 will be $6.08 per hour. That's the amount that the employee has to make, and then the employer makes up the difference to equal minimum wage. So that's just one more thing to keep in mind for January 1, along with the earned leave law. So the next thing I wanted to mention is that there is the DOL issued this, I think it was last week, a bulletin for seasonal based businesses. Now, I'm not going to get into this because it's complicated and I don't know how many of those are on the phone, but if you are a seasonal based business, an amusement park, a ski resort, those kinds of places, there is a way to, the DOL has said, well, so the DOL limits what kind of activities those businesses can engage in without losing their exempt status for certain employees. They are making an exemption this year because COVID has messed everything up, and a lot of seasonal businesses were not able to operate or had to do things differently that may not be the same and may not have qualified for that exemption. So the DOL is recognizing that, and they are allowing those employers to have engaged in alternate activities without losing their exemption. So if you are one of those businesses, that's important for you to know, and we can post that, that bulletin. The next thing that I wanted to just raise generally, in case people want to talk about it, again, this sort of goes to what are the things I need to think about for my policy revisions. And face masks has become more of an issue, at least in my world lately. And I don't mean, do I have to wear one, or what do I do when somebody won't? Because we've talked about that a lot. What I mean is, what kind of face mask is there? Because everybody has seen, there are a ton of businesses now producing face masks with pretty much everything on them you could possibly imagine. And it seems to me that as people start to realize we're going to be wearing these for a long time, they're more willing to buy ones that aren't just the throwaway, paper ones. And so they have more designs, they have sayings, they have things that seem to be increasing. And I actually had a call about a place of employment that had one employee show up with a Black Lives Matter face mask, and the next day another employee showed up with a Confederate flag face mask. So you can see how this is going to be a potential place of some real serious conflict. And so to that extent, private employers have a lot of leeway in terms of dress code and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And that includes personal messages. So my suggestion is, I think before we were hesitant to change some policies thinking, well, by the time we change it, we won't need it anymore. But I don't think that's going to be the case for face masks. And so I think employers ought to consider making it clear what's okay, what's not okay, and where the line is going to be drawn to the extent that you can, consistent with a regular dress code. And maybe you are going to allow some messages, but you're going to have to be careful. It's the same thing with solicitation or allowing people to wear, pens of some kind, but not another kind. So for instance, if you're going to limit somebody from wearing a face mask with a political message, then you're probably going to have to limit somebody who wants to wear one for the Girl Scouts or some other organization like that. So you're just going to have to, better to think that through now and have a response prepared when you're in the situation where you may have to tell somebody they can't wear it anymore. So there's that. And then, you also need to consider your policies on harassment and discrimination, because those two, that example that I gave, we're right in that area about potential harassment, potential discrimination. And so you want to be sure that people understand that your policies, those policies apply also to whatever message they're going to be allowed to use on, for face masks and other things. And then, so I do have some sort of, question and answer kind of things for the FFCRA in terms of childcare and school. They're very random. Maybe I'll just save that for the end of my other updates, and then they may lead into questions that people have. I did want to let everybody know that the DOL has also released a proposed rule about how to define an independent contractor and how they are distinguished from an employee. This is an incredibly important area because there have been a lot of wage and hour investigations and claims when people are misclassified, and of course it could have huge wage implications and penalties and all that stuff. So this is up for comment. It's not final. The comments go through October 26th. If an employer wants to read these or wants to comment on them, they can go to the federal DOL. This is not state, this is federal DOL website, and it's under the regulations section. It doesn't really change it tremendously. We've always had what we've kind of called a control basis test. So in other words, the more personal control a person has over what they're doing, the more likely they are to be an independent contractor as opposed to an employee. But they have, what they said is, they have sort of gotten away from the multi-factor test that's been applied, and they have now 5 factors to examine to determine who really has control over what the person's doing. And really, that's the bottom line. So if you have people who are classified and you want to be sure, or you're not sure at all, then that may be the place to start, and you want to at least be aware that this is out there. But again, they're not final, they're just open for comment. I did raise, let me talk about voting for a second, since that's foremost on everybody's mind now. And we sent a blast out about this earlier because it occurred to me that this is coming up, and maybe people don't know the answer to this. There are many states actually who mandate time off for an employee to go vote. Maine is not one of those states. So there's no law that says that you have to give somebody paid or unpaid leave time to go vote. I'm not saying that it's not a good idea to allow people to do that, especially if they have, we're all in these weird scheduling situations with remote and hybrid schools, and schedules are off. And so if somebody needs to go in the middle of the day, maybe it would behoove an employer to let them go. But the fact is that the law does not require you to do that, nor to pay somebody. They don't have to go on paid time. I did want to mention, and this probably has very rare application, but I've never had occasion to look at, and so it was sort of interesting to me that if you have an employee who decides to run for the legislature, you have to provide, assuming they win, you have to provide that person time off from their job to serve in their position in the legislature for a period of 2 years. Now, this can be paid or unpaid time, but the fact is that an employer, unless they can appeal out of it and get sort of an exemption from it, any employer with 5 or more employees is covered by this law. And so you have to give somebody the period of 2 years to serve with a right of restoration to their regular position or an equivalent job. So it's almost like an FMLA right to restoration, which is fascinating to me and potentially incredibly burdensome. Now it's unpaid, of course, but still, if you've got a position and you can have it vacant for 2 years, maybe you don't need that position anymore. So it's going to be a burden. As I said, there is the appeal section that an employer can sort of challenge, and say, this is a huge burden on my business. I can't keep that job open for 2 years. So there's that. And again, obviously this doesn't occur that often, but it's there. And I just wanted, since we're talking about voting, I thought it was important for people to know. I know, who knew?
I
Right?
had no idea. Wow.
So those are all the general updates. And so then I thought, and we can take whatever questions people have so far or about other unrelated stuff. And if not, I can talk a little bit about some of this return to school business.
You brought up some intriguing things. The mask dress code.
Oh, and the other thing goes kind of along with that mask thing. I did a presentation last week that encompassed the issue of pronouns in the workplace. And I found this really fascinating. It's come up for me a few times, not that often, but I suspect we will see more of this with the protections against gender identity discrimination. And so what I mean by pronouns is that you have an employee who informs you that they do not identify with either with a particular pronoun or even with any pronoun at all. And so the question then becomes, number one, how do you refer to that person? And number two, what if you have other employees who refuse to refer to them in the way they ask to be referred to? So the first question is fairly easy. The answer is you refer to them the way they ask to be referred to. So if you have an employee who says, I identify as male, then you would refer to that person as he, regardless of your own opinion or what you think or anything else. But in preparing for that talk, I found many cases where a coworker or even a supervisor or even the employer refused to use the pronoun of choice, and in some cases raised religion as a protected reason why they should not have to refer to a person as a gender that they did not agree with. So in other words, in one particular case, the person had been born female, but identified as male and asked to be called he or his or whatever other male pronoun. The supervisor refused to do that, saying that the basis of his religion is that you are what you're born. You can't, gender is not something that can be changed or altered. And so he claimed a violation of his religious rights to be forced to call that person he. So then you have to think through, how are you going to accommodate both individuals? And it actually was pretty fascinating. One of the suggestions, if you bring people together and you can't come to some common ground, which would be the hope, of course, then you have to ask, so that you have to accommodate the gender identity preference by that person, but you also may have to accommodate the religious view of the person refusing to use that name, because religion is a protected category as well. And so then I started to think through, well, is there a way to accommodate the religious view? And maybe there is, if you were to allow that person to call the other individual something else, like you call them by their last name, or you use a plural pronoun. So now that's been raised in a lot of cases and you use they or them or their, even though it's a singular person, which sound, it's uncomfortable sometimes because it's a plural and it's not so it's confusing. But the point is that there may be ways to accommodate not only the person who has raised the pronoun issue, but also the person who has a religion, an established religious basis for refusing to use that name by using a last name or a first name. But of course, that's complicated in the workplace because some workplaces are more formal than others. And so, you may need to refer, or feel like you need to refer to somebody as Mr. this or Mrs. that, or, whatever. So it's going to depend on the situation, but I just wanted to raise that because I think employers are going to see more of these types of issues. And I don't want them to just sort of blow it off and say, this is personal. I don't have to get involved in this, because the fact is that you do. So then I guess the last thing I thought before, if we want to talk about these other school related things, is flu shots. I figured I'd bring that up because I know we touched on it last time, but this is the time when employers start to encourage people to get a flu shot or bring somebody in the office to give those flu shots. And of course, this is further complicated this year by COVID, and how do the two interact? And is it even more important to have the flu shot? Those are some of the headlines that I'm seeing, that it's more important to have it than less. And so I want to make sure employers understand that there's nothing about COVID that exempts you from responsibility. If you more strongly encourage people to have the shot, or even try to require them to have it, you will still be responsible for any results of that shot, regardless of whether COVID exists or it's a good idea to have it or anything else. So that's still a workers' comp area of exposure. If you are in any way encouraging the employee to have the shot to be at work, or encouraging them to have it and have somebody give it at work, then you are potentially responsible for any outcome of that shot. So I've had cases where the shot was badly given and resulted in some pretty serious medical problems, and those were covered under workers' comp because the employer had required the person to have it. So the same is true, and there's a continuum, and there's a gray area. Nobody really knows where that line is between what is just encouragement based on this is a good idea for the world in general, but I'm not telling you have to do it, versus requiring somebody to have it. And we've talked about this at length about the ways in which you might portray your offering this service that makes it more likely to be voluntary than required.
It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out with COVID, with the vaccine.
Yeah, and I'm afraid that some of the employers who are less familiar with some of these rules will just assume that this is a great idea because the doctors say it's more important to have a flu shot this year, and will then run afoul of some of these other rules, or put themselves out there for exposure in areas they didn't anticipate because they think they're doing the right thing.
Right.
So that's always a hard one.
Doesn't it? Yeah. It's always too bad when we're just trying to do the right thing and it turns out to be the wrong thing. Right.
Or it's the right thing, but it still gets you in a load of trouble.
Right.
And the worst thing about it is it's trouble that you don't anticipate. It's one thing. And of course, that's the whole point of my job and my being, is to tell you what's going to happen if you do this and this happens, then this is going to be the consequence. Yeah. And then you make your own decision. But this is one of those areas where you certainly could. I mean, any employer can encourage people to have them to keep the workplace as safe as possible, but recognize that you may have a result from that and be able to anticipate it.
Yeah, I just want to remind everyone, if you have questions for Anne-Marie or comments, if it's anything in particular that you want to know about this afternoon, just send us a Q&A in the Zoom. Send us a question through Zoom or Facebook. You can post a comment or a private message, Shelley, and we'll get the question to Anne-Marie. So. Or
you can send a message to Josie.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll be sure to pass it along when she wakes up. All right, so then I mentioned that I had just some really random sort of thoughts about the FFCRA and child and schooling and all that business. So I guess I can start on those if we want to do that. So one of them, everybody knows that under the FMLA, I assume you know, that there's a special rule for spouses who work for the same employer. So you can't take, so if there's a birth of a child for those two spouses, they can't take 12 weeks each for the birth of that child. They have to split that time. And so I wanted to make it clear that that rule does not apply to the emergency FMLA time. So if parents have a child who's remote and they need to be there, it's not the same thing as when somebody's sick under the regular FMLA. They don't split the 12 weeks. They each get their 12 weeks of time. Although arguably they would not be able to take it at the same time because the FFCRA says only one child care provider is at a time. So conceivably, if you had a spouses working for you whose child was remote, they could end up taking up to 24 weeks probably between the two of them for that time. So there's that. And then there was a question about whether or not the FFCRA, FMLA applied to other things that a child was doing besides remote schooling. So for instance, as an example, what if a parent needs to take additional time off to go to the school to pick up the kid's iPad or to pick up their assignments for the week, or even the lunches that are being provided. Sometimes they're not delivered and parents have to go actually pick them up. And the feeling about that is that this is not covered by the FFCRA because it doesn't count as child care. So those extraneous errands, even though it's tied to being remote and needing the child care, the consensus seems to be that those things are not covered in the same way. And then, okay, so here I thought this was a good one. So if a school is open for in-person learning and a student tests positive for COVID, and as a result, all the students who had close contact with that student are sent home to convert to virtual learning for a period of 2 weeks. The question was, does that mean that the FMLA would then apply even though it hadn't before because they were in school? And the pretty obvious answer is yes, because now they're in a situation that's changed and they're remote and it's a requirement. It wasn't a choice. And the schooling is actually not available. So that would be a situation where it does apply. And then the last one I thought was worth mentioning. So there was an employee who was scheduled to work mandatory overtime. And because of the childcare situation, he was only able to work up to 40, but he could no longer work the mandatory overtime because the childcare provider was no longer available after a certain time of day. And so this person had to be home to take over for the childcare provider. The question was, is that covered by the emergency FMLA? It would be at 2/3, not their regular rate of pay. At 2/3, even though he'd already been paid for an entire 40-hour work week. And the answer was yes, that the FMLA contemplates coverage of the employee's regular work hours. So if they are a regular mandatory overtime worker, then that additional time would be covered. I mean, to some extent, all of this may be academic at this point, because I think it's probably true that to the extent people needed the extra FMLA time, it's probably been used up at this point. And even though the time period for that time runs through the end of the year, my guess is most people who needed it probably went through it in the spring or are going through it fast now that school's back in session. So I don't know how much of this, I mean, it may be that the issues employers are going to deal with more now is what do I do when they don't have any leave left? What am I supposed to just let them go anyway with unpaid time, or, how do I deal with that? And then of course we don't know if the DOL is going to renew any of this leave come the end of the year to have a new period as of January 1. I would say that seems entirely possible if the situation has not changed dramatically between now and then, but of course we don't know that. So that's what I got.
Unmute. You are muted now. Okay. There. Now I'm on. Someday we'll all master this mute thing, maybe. This is great. A lot of thought-provoking stuff this week, as always. Again, if anybody has questions, I haven't seen any questions yet, so obviously you've answered everybody's questions already.
Okay.
But yeah, if you have questions, we'll stay here for another 5 minutes, and if we don't have any questions, then we'll wrap up for the afternoon. Again, we're bringing this to you every 2 weeks. We intend to continue as long as, there's something coming in, as long as Anne-Marie will need to join us forever, how long this takes, right? We are happy to be here, and let me see what's coming in. Nope, we're good. Anything that we need to be sort of paying attention to coming down the pike?
I mean, I think at this point, unless there's some sort of big change in terms of schooling, but if it seems pretty steady right now, and I think everybody's just trying to adapt to what that means as it exists right now. So it could all fall apart tomorrow, and then everything changes again. But it seems to me that the focus, and certainly what we're spending more time focusing on, is the January 1, 2021, and what does that mean for all of us in terms of these new laws going into effect, and also complete policy revisions, and dealing with some of the things that normally come up with the first of the year and how we're going to do them, like, for instance, harassment trainings and dissemination of information, and can you do harassment by Zoom, and if so, how does that work? And so I think that's, at least from my perspective, that's what we're sort of looking toward right now.
Stand by. I think we may have a question. Oh, we're getting some clarification. This is real time, ladies and gentlemen.
High tech.
High tech. One of the things that I need to do is update. I need to do it. Policy manual, handbooks, probably job descriptions. I'm not tackling that right now, but I'm sure I'm not alone in that.
No, and we mentioned that last time, because I really think, as much as nobody wants to do it, this is the time to audit where you think your business is going as best you can predict. Because, what we had said is, we all thought these were temporary situations, and now it's appearing like a lot of remote workers may not be temporary. Maybe this is going to be a long-term solution, even if COVID were to resolve. Employers are finding, and employees are both finding, success in remote work, and it may be that this is the new normal. If that's the case, then yes, job descriptions are going to have to be totally redone, because a lot of these remote jobs aren't what somebody was doing in the office. And so it's important to update those so everybody knows what the employee is doing, including the employee, and what the expectations are. And also how our job review is going to be done. This is a big one for the end of the year. For those of you on a calendar year, how are you going to do an evaluation? Are you going to give leeway to the fact that a lot of this was new and people had to adapt? Are you going to delay evaluations completely given the whole situation? I mean, it's hard to criticize someone doing their best in a remote situation. So those are things that have to be dealt with. And then, as we said, all the telecommuting policies that we've talked about for years can be adapted to working from home. All the issues about ergonomics and confidentiality and, workers' comp, and all of those things have to be thought through if this remote stuff is going to go on. Because I think a lot of people have sort of stumbled through saying, well, we're just going to make it until this point and then everyone's going to be back. And now it's looking like that may not be the case.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. I think we kept thinking for a while, well, we'll just get back. I'm not going to put the time into that because we're just going to go back. And now we don't know. There's so much uncertainty. So this is an interesting question. And I'm assuming this is somewhat of a large enough office. It seems, my understanding is they have some employees who are under a hybrid model. We're coming in the office, working remotely. This employer is trying to accommodate especially working parents, and they may have a different schedule from others. So this employer is trying to accommodate school schedules and working parent schedules. And there seems to be some question from other employees or concern that working parents are being favored. Do I need to disclose why some staff have a different schedule, or just manage it? So how much do you, right? So as an employer, can I say, well, yeah, and you have, I think you understand the questions, but you have a number of employees and they're all working on different schedules, and you're trying to accommodate the needs of their family, and other employees might get a little miffed because this person has more flexibility than I do.
Yeah, and I can understand that, but the difficult position for the employer is that you really shouldn't discuss one employee's personal situation with another. I mean, this isn't quite so bad as if it were a medical condition, which is absolutely 100% confidential. But the fact is that you don't know what other people know about an employee's home life, or, I mean, this might not be their biological kid, or it might be their, I mean, who knows what. And it's not really for anybody else to know or to be a part of. So I think just like you have to with any other confidential personnel matter, that's what you have to say, that we're complying with the laws as best we can. And it results in a fluid workplace, and that's what we're doing. So, I mean, that answers the question without really answering it, but that's the way it is.
Oh, great answer. If that employer has any other additional follow-up questions, share those with us, and we'll respond to that. And no doubt we will see more of this going forward as long as this continues, where we're all just day by day trying to figure out what's best for our businesses, our organizations, and our employees. Right?
Well, yeah, and of course, for the school setting, you live day to day is what we're doing, because it might be remote or hybrid this day, and then all of a sudden, all it takes is one exposure, and then you're not, and you're in a totally different place. And so, everybody has to just try and understand as best they can that this is day to day.
And it also gets back to that question about job descriptions and expectations, and how we redefine what a workday looks like. And I'm thinking of parents, and I have friends and family members who are now trying to juggle remote working with remote teaching.
Yep.
And they may be logging in and doing their work after the kids are asleep at the end of the day. And while other employees may have more of a traditional 8 to 5 or 9 to 5. So that's also creating some challenges.
Well, and that's another thing that has to be dealt with, because you have to figure out when can communication take place. And if I'm working, these bizarre off hours, that's okay, as long as I'm available when I need to be available, or people understand why I'm not available at any particular time. And to make sure that whatever that person is doing is being tracked time-wise. So if I've got this bizarre schedule where I work a couple hours in the middle of the night and then I take some hours off to deal with the child and then I come back on and then I go back off, that's where the danger comes with not having tracked hours correctly, because I may lose track and forget to write down I was on, I worked for these 2 hours and then not these 2 and that 2. And that may not seem like a big deal, but it is, because it's on the employer to know what those hours are and to pay appropriately. So you can't let it slide. You can't let employees get distracted or lazy and say, I don't know, it was 2 here, it was 3 there, whatever, I don't care. That's not an okay response.
Interesting. Another question, different topic. What about having a no return to work policy unless a clear COVID test after employee has been sick with the cold, flu, or who knows what?
So I'm going to direct you back to the CDC, because they've changed things up recently and they've gone back and forth about what the right return to society kind of parameters are. I think the last thing I saw is that they had gone backwards to a different answer, because I'm pretty sure right now the response is different based on whether or not there was a test, there was an exposure with symptoms, a contraction of that somebody had COVID and they had symptoms versus somebody had COVID and they didn't have symptoms. And I think there are different timeframes for how long each person should be out. And then there's an issue about testing, because even though, not anymore, but people from certain states could come here and be tested and stay and maybe not serve the entire quarantine. When you're talking about a workplace, I think you have to be even more vigilant, because a test that's not done within a certain period of time may not address the actual exposure. And so that person could still be positive. And so I think what the CDC is still saying is the best answer is to quarantine even with a negative test. So, but I encourage you to go look at the CDC specifically, because like I said, it changes a lot and I haven't looked at it in the last week or so.
What do you do with employees who, if you have an employee who comes in sick, who just doesn't necessarily follow the CDC guidelines, and potentially infects other employees? How do you deal with that?
Well, I don't know that, I hate to say this, but I'm not sure that's that unusual. We've seen a lot of stories in the paper lately about parents sending their kids in when they knew they were sick, or people going to work because they feel like they have to. I think the bottom line is that if an employee presents in the workplace and has any visible symptoms that are concerning, I think an employer still has the right to send that person home, even if there's no confirmed diagnosis, and even if it turns out to be allergies or a cold, because it's better to know than not to know. And I think the ADA and the EEOC is giving employers still pretty wide latitude to make those decisions.
Good, thank you. Looks like that's it for questions. I think we're in good shape. Great questions this afternoon. Great advice and insight, Anne-Marie, as always. Hang on, wait a minute, 1 second. Oh, yep. One of our attendees said thank you.
Oh, well, you're welcome.
Us this afternoon. Thank you, Anne-Marie, as always, and the team there at Redmond Winchell, Shelley's son, for producing behind the scenes for us today. We have recorded this, so we will put this up on our Bangor Region Facebook page. You can watch it. And if you want to watch the whole Anne-Marie series, right there.
Yeah, jump right on that.
So, Shelley, anything to add?
No, it would be neat, however, to watch some of the old ones, the reruns from March.
The early days of.
Yep, it would.
How naive we were.
We'll bring clips next time. We'll do the best of.
Yeah.
Yeah. All the things we got wrong over time, right? Wow. No, I think we did pretty well, actually. Yeah. I think we've been pretty spot on as best we can be.
Yeah,
I think so too. Yeah, it's a historic time in our life for sure.
Well, it does seem like a different lifetime that we were all actually in that room together way back when talking about this.
Right.
And I think when we first started this, I don't think there had been a case in Maine yet.
Right. No, there hadn't been. No.
And I remember Dr. Nesson saying,
You're in for it.
Yeah.
and he was right.
He was right. So here's my parting piece of advice. My understanding is that a witch's broom is the approximate 6-foot distancing. So for all of us who have our witch's broom, you're good.
Yep.
Great. Yeah,
Perfect.
there we go. So I think with that, how do we top that? We'll wrap
I
up.
don't know.
And good luck watching the puppy.
Yes, thank you.
And we will be here 2 weeks from today, same time, 3 o'clock. In the meantime, you know how to get a hold of us if you have any questions, and we're here to help. So thank you. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.